Matthew Hills. I'm the Executive Director of the Thunder Bay Art Gallery. I'm an uninvited guest in this territory, and this territory that belongs to Fort William First Nation, a signatory to the Robinson Superior Treaty of 1850. I'm an uninvited guest in this territory. I am thrilled to see so many of you here this evening. We are pleased to welcome Colin Davis for a talk and for this celebration of steel, grease, and gasoline. We have, as with all of our programs, have to thank the Canada Council for the Arts, Ontario Arts Council, and the City of Thunder Bay for their support, which makes our program possible. We also want to congratulate Penelope Smart, curator for this exhibition, and thank you all for coming out this evening. So I will invite Penelope up to welcome Colin.
Thanks, Matthew. So hello, my name is Penelope Smart. I'm curator here at the Thunder Bay Art Gallery. It's really great to see everyone here. We're a cozy crew tonight, and I think that suits us just fine. I'm excited to introduce you to artist Colin Davis, who's standing just there, who drove into town with his partner Steph just last night. So he's new into town. This is your first time in Thunder Bay?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So he's new to town as of last night. I pressed a button by mistake.
That's okay, just leave it.
There. Okay. Don't want to give anything away. All right. So before I do anything else, this is always such a great part of an event with a visiting artist. I'd like to ask us to give Colin a warm welcome and a big round of applause to celebrate Steel, Grease, Gasoline, his first exhibition in Thunder Bay. Really exciting. Congratulations, Colin. So I'm going to share a few more words about the work that's all around us tonight. But first, it's always a real pleasure to say thank you, to do some shout outs to gallery staff who worked hard to make this exhibition happen and look as good as it does. So I'd like to thank our installation team, Tricia Roy and Damien Rivers-Moore. And I'd also like to say a special shout out to our proud resident Dungeons & Dragons fans on staff. I'm going to name them and call you out, but I checked beforehand, it's okay. So Valen Sacchetti, our administrative coordinator, Katie Poirier, visitor services supervisor, Bob Gravel, marketing and communications coordinator, and by proxy of her teenagers, Megan Neely, collections manager, where I know you host regular D&D nights that take place. So everyone I just mentioned was really excited about the show and wanted to out them tonight. So thank you. Also a huge thank you to Matthew Hills, who you just met, our executive director, for his support of this show and most of all for his belief in artists who create them. So a little more about Colin. He was on CBC Radio earlier this week, and he said something really interesting that got my mind turning about the show. So during the interview, he mentioned that this show is traveling to us from North Bay, sort of the most northeastern tip of Northern Ontario, or what some would call the gateway to the north. But it feels far away from here. It's sort of like on the other side of the vast, huge area that we think of as Northern Ontario. And so it's kind of traveled all the way across this area to Thunder Bay, sort of, on the western side of that, the western edge of Northern Ontario. And thinking about this and thinking about Colin driving here for the show, a question came to my mind. So, what does a man's journey across Northern Ontario into the rural look like these days? And I say this, I'm kidding a little, and it's sort of an awkward question to pose, but looking around the room, these paintings really do allow us to open up or ask this question and create space for it. And thinking about the question, and looking at the paintings, it's sort of, I got to thinking, like, is this journey real or imagined? Is it a quest fueled by Monster energy drinks? Is it scented like a pine tree car fresh kind of pose it this way. These are really interesting questions and really powerful ones too. Looking around the room, these paintings wield brand imagery and influences from heavy metal magazine, D&D, like I already mentioned, and 80s and 90s sci-fi fantasy book covers, which I know we'll hear more about from Colin later. Colin's work stirs up real and imagined narratives of power, protection, isolation, longing, fantasy, and duty. And I think that's a real trick of Colin's talent. This new series, it's a series of new and recent and brand new paintings, offer two different journeys at once. And I think that's where the question of journeys kind of came from. One travels a path of palpable emotion and gritty introspection, for instance, looking at this painting of this man with tattoos here. The other veers into 80s metal, the stuff of legend, if you shift your gaze over there to the sword in the stone. As the expression goes these days, both journeys are valid. All right, Davis is a painter living and working in North Bay, Ontario. His realism grapples earnestly and epically with self-identity, belonging, and self-worth. Davis's work is largely autobiographical, painting himself into many of these portraits, a visage peering out of chainmail, if you gaze over here. He asks the viewer, that's us, to reflect on the modern role of men. Please welcome Colin Davis.
Thanks, Penelope. I stole your water.
Thank you.
So, seeing as I'm a new face to most of you, if Thunder Bay is anything like North Bay, our community is very tight. A lot of faces will be familiar in the scene from show to show, but I imagine most of you aren't familiar with my work or my career before this show. So I thought I would do a little bit of a back up to kind of like school and where I came from after school. So I went to Sheridan College. I'm from Scarborough, but I went to Sheridan College in Oakville and graduated in 2012. And in Sheridan, I studied illustration, which is a commercial art practice, and never quite connected with the world of commercial art. Instead of really focusing on all my classes, I spent all my time in the life drawing room just painting people. So I knew right away there was this connection with painting people, but there's always been a struggle, personally, with the culture of figurative painting, the idea of myself borrowing somebody else's image, and struggling with why am I using this person's image? What am I trying to say? Am I justified in borrowing their likeness? So I've done a lot of self-portraits over the years, and part of the reasoning is that it's, I know that there's no victim because I painted myself. So it's also just nice to check in kind of the length of my hair, and then technically how the work progresses over the years. So this was my kind of the first time doing figurative work outside of school in the gallery, like Toronto commercial gallery setting. In that period of time, I hadn't figured out how to use the figure still. I was struggling with using almost magazine style poses, stuff that wasn't quite working, that was informed a lot by commercial art. So I stepped back and decided to paint only still lifes for a while. So for the next maybe 5 years, all of my gallery work was of about still lifes and these moments, these kind of manufactured moments of magical fantasy within these small natural spaces. So these are some sketches from that time. My work was always kind of about, or informed by, childhood experiences at the cottage, around lakes, forests, Boy Scout, camping adventures. But these sketches were from Miami, where half of my family lives. Just looking at forms, natural forms, mixing together to create interesting kind of totem-like forms or shapes. So this show, 2016, was a still life show in Toronto, and it's the first time I created a large body of work that had one kind of cohesive vision to it. And the idea behind this show was taking natural elements and how does the effect of the assemblage create meaning in these naturally occurring pieces of materials. This was my first time working large scale, so this show, one of the most rewarding parts of it for me was getting to work large scale. Most of them are between 5 and this is 9 feet. And up to that point, trained as an illustrator, most of my work had been really small. So in the maybe 1 foot or under size. And then this was the first 5-foot piece I did. So these are called shrines, and the title of the show is The Grove, which I have borrowed that title again, and it's now that piece there, which is the newest piece of the show.
But these were the trucks.
On the end there. So more of these natural assemblages. And then I really still have this urge to keep painting the figure. And I was approached by this artist group called Artist 25 in Toronto. They're this long-standing group. In the 70s, 25 artists came together to rent a studio. And by the time they reached out to me, they were down to 1 artist. And so this guy was bankrolling the studio all by himself, but he's in his 80s and he needed help. So a few of us had stepped in at that point, and we were running these sessions where 4 times a week people could drop in and paint from the model. So my job was every Saturday I would spend 5 hours at the studio doing a long pose. And we would do these poses with a new model every week. And this is kind of my refamiliarization with the figure, without the pressure of attaching meaning or really worrying about like substance or justification. It's purely about sitting down, enjoying the practice of painting a model. So I did that for about 2 or 3 years, and then we left Toronto for an adventure up north. So my partner is from Timmins, that's our northern connection, and we didn't quite go all the way up to Timmins, but North Bay was the perfect kind of landing place for us to explore new possibilities. So as wonderful as the opportunities in Toronto were art-wise, the connections, the culture, there's also a sense of pressure that's ever present. Whereas we moved to North Bay, and immediately there's this feeling like whatever you want to do in Northern Ontario, if you have the gumption, if you are driven to make it happen, it just starts happening. So I viewed it kind of like the Wild West, and we talk a lot actually about the comparison between Northern Ontario and the American South. There's this freedom, sense of freedom, sense of like individuality, and I'll get to more of the implications of that culturally and how it comes through in the work. But there's this urgency to build something new, and then the pandemic hit, and I knew that I needed to be painting figures again. I was starting to kind of figure out what those paintings would be about, but I had no opportunities to paint models because I was stuck again painting myself. So this is a self-portrait done in 2020, maybe 2021, and it's a reflection on me exploring my new city, just by going for a run every day and seeing a new area of the surroundings. 2021, I was approached by a friend who's a curator, and he had a project in mind, and the project eventually became known as Between Pheasants Contemporary. And this is his family farm, where the left half is a pheasant coop, the right half is a chicken coop. And so the pheasants are culled every year, and there's a period of a few months where the coop is vacant. There's no new pheasants yet, and because it was hard to kind of connect with the traditional gallery scene at that time because we were all shut down. The idea was, what happens if you put work in a contemporary context into an unexpected location? So this is the show in the pheasant coop, and so I finally brought back the figure. I wasn't able to hire any models yet because we were still disconnected, but I was using myself as a model again, more as an anonymous figure. So I started thinking about the body, specifically the male body, identifiers of masculinity in rural and northern contexts. So camouflage, the kind of tarp that you might find across the bed of a pickup truck, this scrap wood in a garage, an ice auger. So this was kind of like reminding myself, you can paint the figure, it can be without taking advantage of your model. I mean, that was myself, but I had these ideas starting to brew about the male body, the male figure, in the contemporary northern and rural context. So looking around my community, I was inspired by these kind of these expressions of self-identity, tinkering. Nothing can be used the way it's given to you. It gets, once you have something, you're the owner, and it's your right to imprint yourself upon it. These cultures of, this is the North Bay waterfront, where especially during COVID, there was these meetings of guys that just come out and they just sit there with their snow machines together and they just look at each other's snow machines. You park your truck and you just have a bunch of trucks parked together, and that's the community of men. I started doing research on Facebook Marketplace. All of these constructions, they made me think of like ready-made art. These like private experiments. It's hard to see some of this stuff sometimes because it's always hidden away in a shed or a garage, but people find a way to show it off on Facebook Marketplace. Stuff like this that makes no sense, I don't know. This guy just, I don't know, he had a bunch of material and one day some extra screws lying around and this thing exists. These almost like kitschy expressions of connecting with these brands like John Deere, where it's like a wink at other people. Like I know what you're thinking, and I'm thinking that too. This is the shed that I found. It was the inspiration for the bottles over there at the entrance. And I was thinking about this imagery in my head for a long time. I knew that I needed to paint a man cave with this OSB, with these wooden shelves and bottles lining it, because I knew that this existed. I had seen it before. And ironically, I found this person on Facebook Marketplace, and I thought, oh, perfect, that's exactly like my man cave idea, and it's a woman. Looking at more garages, sheds, as this idea of this private space where men can leave the home, where you can recharge and be truly like authentic. Looking at some of the uniforms and armor, especially snowmobile outfits, dirt biking outfits, these like colorful expressions of you put on the helmet and you feel invincible and powerful. So looking at all this imagery, thinking about this idea of a man alone against nature, I made this connection that I couldn't stop thinking about between the contemporary masculinity and this machoism fantasy imagery that was such a strong part of video games and especially like the fantasy literature that I was reading as a kid. So this is kind of the mood boarding that I do for the show in general, but also to remind me of individual pieces. And I was looking at this file again today, refreshing this slideshow and zooming in, and because it's been a couple of years, so now I'm re-inspired because I just love looking at this imagery. So I looked at a lot of photographers, I looked at a lot of art historical references. This photo on the right, I didn't even realize it until today when I put this photo back into this presentation, is basically that piece there, which was the last piece that was done for this show. I had this idea of a car in a grove, but you can see the converted car and the wrecked car, which was from a demolition derby in town, kind of came together later. This piece here, you can see, is inspired by this chaotic kind of messiness, this layers. In a sense, it's presented for the enjoyment of the collector themselves and not so much for an outside audience. And then, so when I started thinking about this fantasy imagery, I kept looking at this image, which is from a board game called Hero Quest. Has anybody played Hero Quest? Yeah. So if you still have your Hero Quest, they're like worth $500 on eBay. Yeah, it's in really good condition. So we played this game all the time. It was like this version of D&D, but the most accessible version where it's like they basically are the dungeon master for you, the book. And you're interacting with the pieces in a very linear way, but you get to choose your character, and you're venturing through this dungeon as, of course, the barbarian is the best character. This is Heavy Metal magazine, which is, it's actually before my time. I was looking more at like White Dwarf, which is a Warhammer magazine. But Heavy Metal, the imagery of it is so strong that I think I just kind of absorbed it culturally as a kid, even though it's totally inappropriate for a kid. But that's kind of the point, like this, we talk a lot about body image pressure on young girls, and I think it took a long time. Now the discussion is happening, but the discussion of body image and young boys, these like hyper muscular Arnold Schwarzenegger inspired bodies. But again, looking at this stuff as research, critically, I knew that I couldn't in good conscience create any version of these depictions of women that, even if I know that it's coming from a critical place, I wasn't sure if the viewer was going to know that. So I decided, for now, I'm only going to paint men and see if I can get my point across that way. These are, so this is Conan the Barbarian in the middle. This is an artist named Frank Frazetta, and he served as a really strong inspiration for this show. And this is kind of what I'm imagining all these people, whether they're actually present in the image or whether it's the person you're thinking of that maybe created the sword or the helmet. This machoism, a man against nature, conquering the world with like a quest in mind. And this is a character called Death Dealer, which I knew about, and I was thinking about it a really long time, and it was actually the first piece that I conceptualized for this show. This image on the right is Frazetta's Death Dealer. He's been used for Dungeons and Dragons book covers. He's been used for heavy metal albums. But this image in particular of him on the horse with this foreboding, it's like you imagine that something just happened in the past, this fire creeping up, behind him, and he's emerged victorious. I knew that there was a connection there between this sense of masculinity that basically I was coming from an outsider perspective, just coming to Northern Ontario, and I could sense that there was a strength and an ominous power in these people that I could see. I didn't know whether to go toward it or be afraid of it. There's like this allure of you see somebody on a powerful machine or that has control over their vehicles, and they know what tool to use in their mess of a garage to fix whatever problem there is, and there's an aspiration toward being that kind of man. So I wanted to present this character in a way where you can sense their power, but you can also sense that distance, that there's a disconnect there. They're intentionally on their own. There's nobody around them. They're in control of their own world, but there's also, it's impossible to really fully embrace anybody else into their life. So, yeah, so that's my slides. And I would like to invite anybody to ask about pieces in particular or inspiration in general, and then maybe we can continue the discussion in kind of an open way.
I understand you work on linen.
Yeah.
Where do you get your supply?
Oh, I order all my linen from the U.S. We can get 8-foot rolls in the U.S. and in Canada they're usually 6-foot rolls. So 6-foot rolls I'll order from Portsmouth's, but the 8-foot rolls I order from Dick Blick in the States. It's Claassens linen. It's Belgian. Yeah.
When you moved to the north, more north, did you get to experience many of these different things that you're painting, or like a lot of new northern actual activities that you enjoyed and continue?
Yeah, that's kind of the interesting thing. I still am kind of an outsider as much as I'm admiring what's going on. I haven't been ice fishing. I've never driven a snow machine. So, yeah, there is still this distance, and I don't know if it's my own hesitance that's stopping me, or if in my mind I'm trying to think. I still want to be an observer, ethnography is like when you're embedded in it, like an anthropologist is embedded in a community and studying the community. But I know that I don't want to live the rest of my life as studying the wildlife. So yeah, there needs to be some kind of participation on my end, I think. And I've been thinking a lot because this work has existed for a little while now, most of it, and I've been thinking about my next steps. And I think that is the next step, is to experience life and filter that more as like a part of my identity as opposed to viewing other people's identity.
I was just wondering if you could talk about some of the inspiration and symbolism in this portrait. and whether it maybe connects to the characters that maybe connect these two pieces here.
Yeah, so that piece, I would say is closest to this idea, this feeling of putting on armor for whether it's dirt biking or snowmobiling, whatever it is, and it changing your identity. And this, especially I think teenage boys have this feeling of invincibility. So that's what I was getting at with that, but again, using like this fantasy imagery. Because in a way, I think part of the reason I use the fantasy imagery is because that's what I've connected with masculinity for my whole life. And then this other stuff, this northern stuff is newer. So it's almost like I'm more comfortable with the fantasy. And so especially on myself, to avoid feeling like it's like a self-portrait of me cosplaying as whatever I'm imagining, it's almost more authentic, while still portraying that feeling of invincibility. Yeah.
I have another question too. Can you talk a little bit about the yellow on the snow? I don't want, yeah.
So it was a compositional idea. So there's no literal or figurative meaning behind it. It was, yeah, just color.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your technical process, especially shift from smaller canvases to such a huge scale? The way you talk about it casually goes with that really difficult thing. You've done it so well.
So I think the basis of any painter that I really enjoy that paints in realism is having a history with painting from life. So understanding what color and value and drawing actually the tricks it's playing with the viewer. So I'll get to the actual process.
Yeah, no.
But one thing as a lover of painting that I struggle with a lot is seeing realism that I love on Instagram. And I think it's an amazing painting. And then I go see it in real life, and the quality of the surface is, it just feels like there's a lack of depth. And I think that comes from experience of painting from life, really dissecting something, not in a photographic way, but in an actual, like, what does value mean, what does color mean, how do you depict form, what is the photo saying to you, and then you have to translate it back into two-dimensional form. So the way I work now is mostly I'm starting with the transfer. So I'll print out sheets of paper with the photo on it. Well, I'll back up. So something like this, or like the two vehicles there. I'm doing a Photoshop collage, basically.
Yeah.
A bunch of photos together. Like it might be 5 different photos of that red car that I've kind of stitched together in Photoshop. So I get a pretty close version of what I think the painting will be. Print it out at 1:1 scale on sheets of paper, charcoal the back, and just trace the major lines. And that way I know that it's going to look like my Photoshop collage. And then I'm working with, I have a large monitor beside my painting, and I'm like working off the monitor, basically, like directly off Photoshop.
Thank you.
Most linen has sizing on it. Do you remove remove the sizing and wash it, or use as is?
I'm actually using pre-primed linen.
Really?
So yeah, it's lead primed, so oil-based lead.
Artist column, thank you.
Yeah.
You actually have that chainmail
Yeah.
mask?
And both myself and my brother have independently purchased the same piece of chainmail. I also have that sword in my house, and this helmet.
Does that helmet have the fox symbol on it?
It's stickers, so the real one isn't cut out. I just did that in the painting effect, but yeah, I put the stickers on for the reference purposes so that I knew kind of what a cut would look like. Yeah.
You mentioned fantasy as like a way into storytelling and imagery here in the North, and like in this current way you're working and things you're painting. Do you think, and the fantasy that you've grown up with is sort of having like a bit of a negative relationship to some of it, maybe not all of it, but like the heavy metal magazine. Do you think fantasy has changed in terms of like a genre for as like a way into something? Because I feel like fantasy is like really popular and kind of come into its own in a new way, like now, like with Rings of Power and all, you know, like not just Rings of Power, but like all kinds of different places. And so do you see that being a change? Does this work connect to the sort of moment in fantasy, or where does fantasy kind of live as a genre or like a portal for you now?
Yeah, I think the reason I chose 80s fantasy, even though it's before my time really, is because of that. It has this, the time capsule, it had this identity that, yeah, you're right, now it's very different. If I think of D&D culture now, like a lot of the actual play podcasts are very inclusive, like super queer friendly. It was probably a big step to even get women and girls to the table, but now that's just expected. I was working on, I don't know if it must have been before the show, but there's a really popular D&D podcast called The Adventure Zone that I was listening to, and that's like the epitome of inclusive, wholesome, but really emotional and like friendly, accessible fantasy. And you're right, now if I were to compare northern and rural masculinity to that fantasy, it would be completely different. I think that there'd be a lot different parallels or different connections to make. But yeah, like Frazetta, his work would not be accepted today, I don't think. There's an interesting, like, I'll say his name to a certain age of fantasy fan, and they'll, like, their eyes will light up because they love this stuff. And then you can say his name to, like, a lot of contemporary, like, MFA students, and they'll think this is the most hilarious joke ever. How can anybody ever take that stuff seriously? So yeah, it's evolved a lot. Right, yeah.
So, along with, oops, I just like lost my glasses. I'm so excited. I have the opportunity to chat with school-aged youth in the gallery here, and one of the questions that we like to ask is who the paintings remind them, and it's often their
Yeah, it's something I've thought about a lot in the kind of the formulation of this show. I mean, I'm mid-30s and just constantly thinking about like family and legacy, and if I were to have a son, what teachings am I going to pass on? So yeah, it's definitely like the presented imagery is problematic. Like we need to step past that. But I don't think like it's important to me that this is not a negative view, or like it's critical, but it's not saying any of this, especially because I'm an outsider. I'm not saying this is bad or you're wrong for aspiring to these identities. I think there's a lot of courage and like honor and responsibility tied in with these feelings of providership and being a strong foundation for your family. So I think that kind of stuff is still a really valuable foundation for young boys. I read all the time.
Maybe one or two more questions? Or one more question?
Can we get in touch with you personally?
Yeah.
If you have any other questions?
So the best way is on Instagram. It's Colin W. Davis. Or you can email me, Colin at Colin W. Davis. But yeah, email me, message me anytime. I like chatting. I spent all day chatting. I did a really compressed tour of Thunder Bay today. I went to Evershull High School, chatted with them. Then I went to Lakehead, chatted with them. And now I'm here, so I feel like I've done the tour. It's been super awesome being here. So thank you everyone for having me. Thank you for the warm welcome. Thank you to Penelope, especially for